Last week I indicated the purpose of this weekly presentation to explain various aspects of tax, social welfare, consumer rights, various legal issues such as landlord and tenant planning, etc., and explain them in a very down-to-earth, simple manner in which the public could understand. I also indicated that I was going to try to bring the public up to date on any recent legal developments that might be of interest to them. One thing I just want to bring to people's attention this week is that people are all familiar with the idea of barring orders and protection orders. Now, to get a barring order, or indeed a protection order, you must prove to the court or convince the court that there is some degree of violence involved or a threat of violence. Now, people often ask me about what's the situation regarding mental cruelty, where there isn't actually a threat of physical violence. The position is that you won't get a barring order or a protection order just by invoking mental cruelty, but there is no legislation in place which makes mental cruelty an actual criminal offence, which you can complain about to the Gardaí, and they can decide if there's sufficient evidence to warrant the prosecution. The type of behaviour is defined as coercive control, where one partner, behaves in very, very badly, such as to cause mental anguish and anxiety and distress to his or her other partner. So that legislation is there, and that option is there for people suffering, whether it be a spouse, a partner, somebody you're living with, etc. That remedy is there now. You can complain. You can actually make a complaint to the Gardaí about that. Now, today I want to focus on a small aspect of the tax system. You will have heard reports, and indeed the revenue commissioners have stated themselves on a number of occasions, that there's a lot of tax credits and tax allowances which remain unclaimed, even though people might be entitled to them. I suspect that the reason they don't claim them is because they're probably not aware of them. And as I say, I want to just focus in on a few today. But first of all, generally speaking, everybody is aware of the general allowances, which you get automatically: 2,000 for a single person, 4,000 for a married person. If the person is working, you get an extra 2,000 PAYE allowance, or if they're self-employed, you get the equivalent of the 2,000. It's called an earned income allowance. Now, there are many allowances which, as I say, people don't claim for one reason or another. There's a whole raft of allowances there, such as age credit. For example, for a single person over 65, they can claim €245 off their tax. If they're married, they can claim double that, which is €490 off their tax. Widows, there's a special allowance for widows, and especially in the year of bereavement. There are allowances, for example, rent tax credit for people renting accommodation. You can claim against your tax at the 20% rate up to a maximum of €1,000 per annum. If you're single, if you're married, you can double that. It'll be double that, 2,000. And what's not generally known is that if parents are paying rent for their kids who are going to college, the parents themselves, the kids in most cases won't have any taxable income. The parents themselves can claim that rent allowance against their own income if they're paying the rent on behalf of their kids, as of course they usually will be. There are all sorts of rules around mortgage interest relief for first-time purchasers. There's, as I say, various other credits that people don't, some people haven't claimed or don't seem to be aware of. Now, I just want to zone in today on three particular credits in relation to children and elderly people, which, as I say, are not generally claimed for. One is the dependent relative allowance. This is a tax credit. Tax credit means money that comes directly off your tax bill. Suppose your tax bill is 6,000 and you have a tax credit of 500. Your tax bill is reduced to 5,500. There's a thing called a dependent relative allowance, where you're looking after a relative who is elderly or incapacitated in any way. You're entitled to claim €305 per annum off your tax for that. Now, there's a much more generous allowance for people who look after incapacitated children, which I'll come to in a moment. There's also a tax credit called single person single person child carer credit, which if you're looking after a child on your own, you can claim €1,900 off your income tax, which is quite a considerable saving. Actually, you can claim it for your own child, or if the child is adopted, you can claim it, or even if the child isn't adopted, if you can show that you're supporting the child financially, then you can claim, you can put in a claim for that credit. There are various rules around that, which I won't go into today because it would unnecessarily complicate the situation, but that is the general position. Now, there is, as I say, a much more generous credit for people who are looking after for the parent or guardian of a child who is incapacitated either mentally or physically. The amount of that credit actually is €3,800. €3,800 will come off your tax. Now you'll have to prove, obviously by reference to doctors' reports, etc., that they are sufficiently mentally or physically incapacitated to meet the threshold to gain the allowance. The child must be under the age of 18, or if over 18, they must be in permanent full-time education or training. So that's a very generous allowance. People who claim that allowance can't actually claim the dependent relative allowance, the earlier allowance I mentioned of €305. But obviously it's a much more generous allowance, and if you are looking after somebody, a child who is incapacitated either mentally or physically, then it's well worthwhile putting in a claim for that allowance because, as I've said, it is very generous. There's a whole lot of other aspects of tax for the elderly. People have special concessions if they're over the age of 65. People can set up a deed of covenant and claim tax relief on that for certain school fees, etc., or third level fees. There's all sorts of things, hidden, or I won't say hidden, but tucked away in the very large income tax code which we have in this country, and people should be aware of their rights in that regard. Now, if anybody has any suggestions as to whether I should elaborate on that in a future broadcast, or whether I should cover other aspects of the tax system or whatever, please feel free to contact me, willie.od@oireachtas.ie. That's my email address.